just still spinning, but I'll let you know. We're live streaming.
Thank you. So with that, we will begin. Welcome to the regular board meeting for May 27th, 2020, if anything at irregular times. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize this meeting is taking place throughout Coast Salish territories, and I'm so thankful that we're all here to work this afternoon. With that, we'll get on to approval of the agenda. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to propose a couple of changes to the agenda, and if you allow me, I would like to have under committee report number 1, item number 11, which is file number 02-A-17RS for PID 029596947, pulled from today's agenda and referred to the next regular meeting of the board on June the 10th, 2020. And I would also include that we have a closed session meeting immediately following this open session under Community Charter Section 90, Sub 1, Sub I, legal advice. And I'd move those amendments to the agenda.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Legault, you had your hand up. I was seconded by Director Sebring. Ms. Legault, did you have a...
What was the number? You said it so fast. Excuse me.
Sorry, Director Acton, I'll come to you in just a moment.
Okay.
Legault?
Sorry, I just also for the agenda wanted to make a note to delete item CR2, which was the recommendation that was to come forward from Regional Services this morning. That was referred to Electoral Area Services next, and to formally add item NB1, which is the staff report from Development Services on the temporary expanded liquor service area authorizations.
Thank you. Sorry, Director Acton? Director Acton? Your microphone is muted.
Sorry, what was the item to be pulled from Director Morrison?
Mr. Chair, it was item number 11 under committee report 1.
Thank you.
And explanation?
Sorry, that's the agenda has been moved and seconded with the changes. Do you need a follow-up on that? Okay, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I've got a minute. I'd like to make a motion on minute of business arising from the minutes.
Yeah, that'll be dealt with when the minutes adoption comes up. And then when we go to business,
thanks.
I'll come to you when we go to business arising.
Okay.
So that was, the agenda was moved with the amendments by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Sebring. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is adoption of the regular board meeting minutes of May 13th, 2020.
Thank you. And moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion on the minutes? I'll come to you, Director Nicholson, under business arising. Seeing no discussion on the minutes, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. And now business arising, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to refer CBRD bylaw number 4281, Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam Glenora zoning amendment bylaw, C5 Zone 4450 Trans-Canada Highway 2019, which was dealt with at the board meeting of May 13th. I'd like to refer it to EASC for discussion regarding amending the list of permitted uses.
All right, so that's by Director Nicholson. Do we have a seconder? I'm not seeing a seconder. I'll second it for discussion, even though I'm loath to do that. Director Nicholson, what did you want to explain why you want this referred back?
Yes, so I had, I was thinking about this. I didn't, when we had the first public hearing on this application, which was the related to the old Payless gas station near the corner of Coxsila and the highway. The community came out and were quite concerned about water and the potential for water being affected by the use of automotive. So that was deleted. But when I started to think about the list and I went back and I reviewed it, there's funeral homes on there, and I really don't think it would be wise to go back to a public hearing with funeral homes on there, because that would be potentially very negative to a water source. And in addition, traffic was an issue. So I would just like to have a second look at those permitted uses before we take the time to go to public hearing again.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on that motion? I'll go to Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Nicholson, could you explain just a little bit as to what the detrimental effects of a funeral home might be? I'm a bit unsure about that one.
Director Nicholson.
Yes, they dissolve bodies now.
So are we talking about a funeral parlor or a crematorium or?
Well, I think funeral parlors, they can. It's not a crematorium. One of the ways that they can dispose of bodies now is to dissolve them and pour them down the drain. And I just think it's an issue that could come up, and I don't think it's worth spending money on a public hearing if it's not going to be palatable to the community.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this? All right, so this is a referral back to EASC on permitted uses. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? I have directors Yanni DiNardo, Kuhn, Morrison, Haim, and Acton. Sebring opposed? Did I not count anyone? I think I got Director Kuhn. Ms. Legault?
I'm sorry, I can't help you on this one. It would need to be done again.
Sorry, I was reading them. Okay. Can we just have those opposed again raise your hands?
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair. Since this is a land use issue in an electoral area, do the municipal directors even get to vote? I'm just wondering.
Oh, that'd be through to Ms. Legault. I'm not quite sure, actually. This was a business arising from the minutes, and it was a referral. But yeah, I get your point. So I'll go to Ms. Legault for clarity.
Yes, I believe this should be a rural area director vote.
Thank you. My apologies. Thank you.
I'm not against it.
All right. So then I'll ask for this. So this is the 9 electoral areas only. All those opposed, I'll just ask for the opposed to raise your hands. So it's directors Yanni DiNardo, Kuhn, Morrison, Haim, and Acton opposed. So that motion fails. Thank you. So I believe that if there's concerns around the use, so after the public hearing, then, I guess you've made those change. The bylaws will have been read those times already. So, all right, thank you. We'll move on in the agenda. Now we are to public input period. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item is with respect to application RZ 18A02 from the Electoral Area Services Committee minutes from Bernhard Yearlink. There are a number of problems with this application as I see it. One, the spokesperson has a conflict since this person has been hired by the CVRD to act as a consultant on the official community plan harmonization. 2, the rezoning allows for buildings to be up to 4 stories. That is up to 15 meters for a flat or nearly flat roof building and 17 meters with a building roof greater than a 1:12 slope roof. The Malahat Fire Department does not have the capability to deal with fires in a 4-story building. 3, there is inadequate water present to deal with a serious fire. The National Fire Academy of the USA has determined that the following formula governs the amount of water flow in USG per minute required to fight a structure fire. Fire flow equals length times width divided by 3 equals US gallons per minute per floor of the building. An additional 25% would be required to protect adjacent structures from fire. It's proposed to have a 4-story water storage systems holding a total of 11,200 US gallons. For a fire that has spread through a 1-story building that measures 40 by 60 feet, this is enough water for a total of 10.5 minutes, taking into account a further 25% to protect adjacent structures, provided, of course, if these storage tanks can disperse water rapidly enough for the firefighters to use. For a fire in a 2-story similar footprint building, there is enough water for five minutes of firefighting. In an assessment of the application by J.E. Anderson Associates, it is concluded that the existing buildings are not sprinklered and thus the on-site water supply system is not designed to provide fire flows. I conclude that if there is a major fire, it will not be controlled by firefighting activities. The second item is in regard to item IN1, which is the Shawnigan Residents Association report on the CVRD grant and aid funding for milfoil education from Dave Hutchinson, co-editor, Shawnigan Focus newspaper and Shawnigan Research Group member. To the CVRD board. Last year, 2019, the Shawnigan Residents Association received grant and aid funding intended to promote public awareness about the spread of Eurasian water milfoil within Shawnigan Lake. The resulting campaign recommended manual removal between June 15th and when the plant flowers, or September 15th. Waterfront owners were encouraged to employ professional divers and to ensure that all fragments were collected. While well-intentioned and effectively carried out, the campaign actually contributed to the problem. In 2018, Shawnigan Lake School commissioned the Drone Environmental Services to prepare a Eurasian water milfoil management plan for Shawnigan Lake, which contained the following statements. While the plant is a perennial, it has a seasonal pattern of growth. Shoots start to grow rapidly when the water temperatures reach about 15 degrees Celsius. Mechanical fragmentation during cold months does not result in spread since the dislodged fragments will not re-sprout given the cold water temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. As a result of the SRA campaign, numerous property owners did hire the recommended diving company to remove milfoil around their stretch of shoreline during the summer months. Others used mask and snorkel to inexpertly attempt manual removal. The water temperature at this time is well above 15 degrees. While attempts were made to collect fragments, this was not possible to do effectively, and many fronds escaped with an excellent chance of propagation. It was exactly the wrong time of year to be doing this. Apparently, the June 15th to September 15th window is mandated by the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations in order to protect fish habitat. One of the species that would be protected is smallmouth bass, which itself an invasive species has disrupted the ecology over the lake over the last 20 years. More effort and funding to promote milfoil harvesting during periods when the lake is above 10 degrees Celsius is a mistake. The SRA should revise their campaign and be directed to work with the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations, the CVRD, and credible professionals to come up with a harvesting plan that occurs when the water is colder. The next item is from Cliff Evans at Shawnigan Lake. Mr. Chair, I received my 2020 property tax bill. With the grants seniors receive, my overall taxes, including CVRD Hospital and Improvement District, increased by 16.94%. It's time for the CVRD to start reducing our wants from our needs, or we're going to have more homeless seniors in the Cowichan Valley. And his comment is with respect to item IN1, the Shawnigan Residents Association report on grant and aid funding. The PowerPoint presentation recognizes the collaborative relationship between Shawnigan Basin Society and the Shawnigan Residents Association for the benefit of our community. Unfortunately, the Shawnigan Basin Society no longer receives funding from the CVRD. Without some financial assistance from the CVRD, our team of well-qualified professionals are struggling to provide the valuable services we have provided in the past. Our teams are constantly in the field performing water and soil tests to analyze where our watershed problems start and what we can do to rectify them. All our data is recorded and stored at the SBS office. This data is available and free to anyone. It is hoped that the CVRD will once again recognize the important contribution of the tireless professional volunteers of the Shawnigan Basin Society with some measure of financial support. And the final item for public input period is from Susan Kaufman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. It was good to see at the last board meeting that some movement has been made to once again incorporate delegations and applicants to participate in SCVRD meetings electronically. Unfortunately, members of the public are still waiting to hear when we may also be afforded the opportunity to participate electronically during public input and question period portions. Without the ability to do so, our words do not have the same impact, and sometimes the questions posed are not received as intended. The ability to ask follow-up questions or other clarification is lost. Hopefully you can provide some insight on when this opportunity will be offered. Delegations and applicants have successfully participated in meetings, and I'm sure members of the public will be able to do so as well. As a member of the Area E APC, I received communication from the CVRD asking that I conduct an assessment on whether or not I could use a WebEx platform. Although this comes sometime after a query from this APC member and I believe a request for a staff report on reinstating the APCs. Hopefully you can provide an update on this. And Mr. Chair, members of the public who do participate, whether through public input or question period or as delegations, or even members of the different volunteer commissions, we spend a good amount of our time researching, reviewing, and offering up what we believe are valuable contributions to the CVRD. Not very often, but sometimes the input we provide at various meetings is met with a less than friendly, sometimes sarcastic response or labeled as rhetorical. Just as the CVRD board appreciates respectful dialogue, so do we. Question period assumes, through the language contained in Part 5, that the members of the public will not present with thoughtful and respectful language. Previous request to have this language changed to reflect the friendly amendment to the public input policy has not yet been acknowledged. Maybe it is in the works and we can look forward to a friendly amendment soon. And that concludes the submissions for public input period.
Thank you, Ms. Legault. I appreciate the expediency with you got through all those input and those words. So we'll be moving on then. I can't believe we're on delegation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I am just going to admit our delegation from the lobby. And the delegation is Tom Rutherford, Executive Director of Cowichan Watershed Board, regarding the presentation of the annual report and 5-year business plan, and this is for information.
Thank you. We had Mr. Rutherford in there, but I don't see him in here now. Oh, here he comes. Hello, Tom.
Good morning, Chair Stone, or good afternoon, I guess.
Yes, good afternoon. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm not sure if you're working up the presentation, but we're ready for your presentation. We welcome you, and I don't know if staff wanted to introduce the delegation, but on behalf of the board, I'll welcome you, Mr. Rutherford, and thank you for all of the work of the Cowichan Watershed Board, and we look forward to your presentation.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm just, am I allowed to share screen here on this setup? I'm just looking for a share screen command.
The bottom row.
Okay, so
next to the video button should be a share content button.
That's great. Thank you. So I'm going to shut off my video because I have a sketchy internet connection. So I think my audio will be a little bit clearer if I do. So I will do that. And I'm also going to attempt to share my screen. So I'll just see if this is working. Hopefully it will.
Coming up, Mr. Rutherford, while you do that, I just want to the directors, if you have questions for Mr. Rutherford, if you could just write them down and hold them to the end, because I can't see everyone if you're wanting to speak. And also it just allows Mr. Rutherford to go through the presentation, and then once that's concluded, we'll move the presentation out and go to questions and discussion. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you very much, Chair Stone. So I would like to say that I really appreciate the opportunity to spend a bit of time with you, if only virtually. And I was originally scheduled to do this in mid-March. And the motivation at that time was to share with you our 2019 annual report, our 2020 work plan, and our 5-year business plan. and these are included in your meeting package. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about these documents. But you know what? The last 8 weeks have given me, and I guess given all of us, a chance to think about the things that are really important to us as individuals, and maybe more importantly, as a community. And so accordingly, I've decided to keep things at a relatively high level today and just give you 5 things to think about in terms of the role that the Watershed Board plays in the CBRD community, why that role is important, and why it is likely to perhaps become more important as time moves on. So I'd like to first maybe do a quick review of the board. I'd like to speak about partnerships. I'd like to speak about the importance of getting things done. I'd like to speak about one of our principles, Nutsamat, yaays. And finally, why is this important to you? Why should you really care about any of this? So moving quickly, a really high-level look of what the board looks like. And I think many of you are familiar with this. The board is co-chaired by the chair of CBRD and the chief of Cowichan tribes. There are elected officials from each group on the board. There are representatives from the federal government and the province, and there are 4 at-large appointees that are jointly appointed by the co-chairs. Right now, there are Dr. Shannon Waters, our medical health officer, the Honorable David Anderson, ex-Minister of Environment and Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Tim Kolchewski, fisheries biologist, and Christine Sandu, elected councillor from the town of Lake Cowichan. So CBRD obviously gets its authority through the province, through the Local Government Act, and Cowichan Tribes brings the authority associated with unextinguished rights and title. So we have staff, myself and Jill Thompson, who each have resourcing for 2 days of work a week. And we have a technical advisory committee. This is where the technical folks sit, and they are representatives from our 5 working groups that in fact deliver on our targets, which are the mechanism through which we do our work on the ground. We also have a series of principles that we do our business by, and I'll speak to 2 of those today. Last comment on this is not a board, this is not a stakeholders board. This is a board of leaders. So speaking to our principles, I would like to talk about partnerships. We are based on a foundational partnership between CBRD and Cowichan Tribes. This is a unique partnership, it's a committed partnership, and it's not only unique in BC, it's unique in Canada. And we've generated quite a bit of profile, and representatives from the board have been asked to speak on how this works virtually across Canada, from Halifax to Peace River and all points in between. So we're based on a partnership, but I think just as important, we do all our work through partnerships. We work with all levels of government, academia, industry, the NGOs. We do not do anything unilaterally. All our work is delivered through partnerships, and we don't have to lead from in front. Many times I feel we can be more effective bringing people together and providing opportunities for our partners to succeed. And I think developing, maintaining, and strengthening these effective, and unique partnerships has really served us well, and I think is really building a resilient water stewardship model moving forward. So getting things done. The Watershed Board is all about getting things done. And I think it's important, and I'll come back to this. We've received core funding from CBRD since our inception 10 years ago. And we've leveraged that funding, often exponentially, with funding from a variety of partners, including our other foundational partner, Cowichan Tribes, the Real Estate Foundation, BC Freshwater Legacy Initiative, Sustainable Funding for Governance Initiative, Environment Canada, Eco Action, RBC, and a host of others. And I'd like to point out that this year, we wrote a proposal for $50,000 to RBC. And that money was not for us, but it was for Cowichan Tribes, because we realized that that to engage in some of the work we need to engage in, that our partners need the capacity to be at the table. So we're getting things done. And I'd just like to briefly, one of the new features in our annual report is the top 10 list. I'm a diehard David Letterman fan. So just some examples of some of the things we've done with our partners. We've recruited $4 million to address water sustainability in the Cowichan. We've worked with Flinro to use the new critical flows like tool that's under the Water Sustainability Act for the first time in the province on the Cook Isla. We're also engaged in a scoping process for water sustainability plan on the Cook Isla. Again, that would be the first in BC. We spent a lot of resources on public outreach, and I would direct you to our We're Ready website and our We're Ready Facebook page. And we feel it's really important for the people that live in the valley to be educated and aware and up to speed with water issues. We've also been helpful in bringing the, I guess the two communities that are furthest ahead with water sustainability planning, the Nicola Valley and the Cook Isla, or like the Cowichan together. So we received funding to to bring the 5 Nicola Valley chiefs here along with their Flinro partners, and then we also were able to travel up to Nicola. And I feel that this peer-to-peer work is very important for both communities. So lots of highlights. I won't go into them. I realize we're short on time. I don't want to rush through this part of it. Nutsamat Chris yaays the ka. So we come together to work together to be stronger as partners for the watershed. This is 2020, and I think no meaningful progress on water or any resource management issues can be made by any level of government, regional or otherwise, without meaningful engagement and leadership from our First Nations partners. Water resources, I think, are too valuable for us to make a misstep at this time. And in the spirit of UNDRIP and reconciliation, I would suggest there's no other model that would work. And I'll predict right now that this watershed board model will be employed across disciplines in the coming years. And I am convinced we're getting it right. You're getting it right. We're getting this right together. And I can't overemphasize the importance, I think, of the communities working together on water and on other issues. So what's the bottom line? I think we've established a strong track record, and that's documented in our annual reports. We have a clear outline of what we want to do this year, and that's included in our work plan. And we have a 5-year vision with annual milestones on where we want to go, and that's captured in our business plan. So why should you really care about any of this? Well, I think you should, because it's important work. You are community leaders, and you're funding us. So I have a request. Firstly, I would hope, and I know you're all busy, that you would take time to review our annual report and business plans, and reach out to me if you have any questions, or if you have any recommendations on how we could do things better. Secondly, I would request that that you continue with our annual core funding, which is very important to us. These are the resources we use not to do work on the ground, but to empower us to do work on the ground, to run our meetings, but to write our proposals. And it's important. We're not a high budget organization. We have no office, no phones, no computers, no travel, but our core funding is very important to us. So our commitment is we will continue to leverage resources we receive from CVRD and all our other funders, use them efficiently and effectively to support water and watershed sustainability programming here, work that benefits all citizens of the valley. And we will do so using our partnership and reconciliation model. And I think most importantly, if you look at what we've accomplished over the last 10 years, we can be proud of what we do. You can be proud of what we do. And I'm really looking forward to the next 10 years. So I've rushed through this, but I realize I'm on a limited timeline, and I would be more than happy to take any questions. Huy Tseep, CM, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rutherford. If you can, I maybe let it linger there for just a moment. That's some great photos there of the last year of work or many years of work. But if you're able to lower your presentation, I can see the directors, and then we can go to questions and comments from our elected officials. There we go. Hello, everyone. I'll go to Director Wilson first, then Justice. And I don't have any other hands yet, but I'll watch for them. Go ahead, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Tom. That was a good presentation. I appreciate what you guys are doing. I'm just going to read out what a watershed is according to Wikipedia: an area of land that catches rain, snow, and drains or seeps into a marsh, stream, river, lake, or groundwater. And I'm sure that's the same definition that you've got, but this is purely for my own information. So you've got a heading there of getting things done. And on page, you're establishing adequate and stable funding for local watershed governance and health. So great. I like that. And as you know, here in Cobble Hill, so I'm being a little bit local here, we have funding for full spectrum testing of ACFA 197 for 2 years. And just to get that funding for that testing was a long and sometimes antagonistic battle to actually get it approved. Is it likely then that the CWB would be involved in monitoring water quality throughout the CVRD in cases such as this we have in Cobble Hill, where possible sources of contamination exist? Is that part of your remit as part of the Watershed Board?
Go ahead, Mr. Rutherford.
So thank you. Yeah, that's an excellent question. So in our governance manual, it's clearly laid out what our geographic footprint is, and that includes the watersheds of the Cowichan and the Cowichan rivers. So I understand you have serious issues which you're working hard to deal with in your watersheds in Cobble Hill, but no, that is not an issue that we would be involved with. Our geographic footprint is really clear at this time.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and just a comment before the follow up, and the monitoring and the issues you're discussing would be addressed, I believe, through the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program. But I'll go back to you, Director Wilson, for a follow up.
Yeah, well, as I understand it, then the Cowichan Watershed Board is funded through the Drinking Water Program as well. So I'm kind of surprised that you have such a narrow footprint, and I can understand to a certain extent why. Both rivers are very important. I'll leave it at that, but I'm obviously going to be looking at this one a lot more carefully.
Yeah, and I would suggest reading the Genesis documents that are available on the Cowichan Watershed Board's website, because it does kind of give the reasons that geographic area was located originally around the Heritage River and concerns around the Cowichan and Cowichan, obviously, as well, in a critical situation. At the last meeting, we just reviewed the flows for the Cowichan, and they are alarmingly low again this year. But again, great information and good questions, because I think that's a broader conversation we need to have as a board. So I'll go to Director Justice next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Rutherford. Thanks for the presentation, Tom. I have a question pertaining to one aspect of the water quality work. So I noted that in the work plan on page 23, which is actually page 68 in the agenda, there's a medium priority target activity to coordinate with partners toward water quality monitoring in the Cowichan and Somenos watersheds. And I was curious if you've considered as a board, going beyond monitoring and considering partnering on the mitigation work that's being done in reducing phosphorus levels. And as a part of that, I wonder if you can tell me if there's been any investigation of the potential effects of cyanobacteria and cyanotoxins, potentially cyanotoxins that flow out of the Cowichan and Somnos systems into the lower river and estuary, and the effects that those have on, potential effects that those have on the edibility of shellfish.
So to Mr. Rutherford.
Excellent questions again. Thank you for that. So there were several questions there. The first one, would we have an interest in partnering not only with the water quality sampling initiatives, but in mitigation? The answer to that is yes. I sat on the task force that was hosted by North Cowichan along with several others. And so I'm certainly aware of the issues, and in my former career with DFO, I was involved with monitoring and partnerships with the NGO community and with the province. So I'm well aware of the issues. And yes, we would be interested in partnering on mitigation. Like every other organization, it's a matter of capacity and resources and prioritization. But certainly it's a priority for the community. Your second question was, have we monitored the effects when the lake flushes in the fall, right? These bacteria tend to accumulate over the summer, and then with our large first flush in the fall, they wash out. So we have done in the past opportunistic sampling on first flush events, and we have not traced any effects. Now, that is not an absolute statement. I can't say for sure that there is no, or there are no effects on shellfish from that, but they've not been detected to date. And I think perhaps a more rigorous program would be necessary in order to really make a definitive statement. So I hope that helps.
No follow-up from Director Justice. I do not have anyone else on my speakers list. Is there any more questions for Mr. Rutherford? I'll go to Director McGonigal and then Smith. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is more a question through to the Finance Department on the $50,000 annual contribution. I'm just trying to clarify whether the Cowichan Watershed Board resided within those granting letters that were sent to organizations on funding allocations, if they would be expended or not. I'm not positive on that, so I just wanted to clarify that, and to clarify that the $50,000 is still committed for 2020. I can't recall.
Thank you. I don't think there's any change for that grant, but Ms. Weiner.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director McGonigal, that money is in the drinking water and the watershed, the DWIP project. So within that one has got the 50,000 for strategic partnerships, and that's where the money's been allocated out of last year. And that is coming back to the board. So there's nothing been done and no agreement signed for this year.
Just to follow up, if I may. So there has been a commitment for the past 10 years, and I would hope that moving forward, we could allocate that outside of the watershed function that we have implemented into some other avenue, perhaps, so there is not an overlap of that possible. And I'm just thinking outside the box, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Part of the challenge leading up to this was there wasn't an appropriate function to be doing this funding out of. So the drinking water watershed protection was seen as the first time we had an appropriate function to do that funding through. Now, how we allocate that funding in the future will always be a decision of the board. But at this time, I think the challenge up until year 10 of this process, the 9 years previous, was that this was coming out of general government without a proper function. And at this point, we do have that. So definitely further discussions will be had around allocations of funding from that function for sure.
Thank you. And I just want to thank Mr. Rutherford and the Cowichan Watershed Board for the yeoman's work that you have done for the past decade and moving forward with committed partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Smith. And that's my last speaker on my list, so I'll go to Director Smith, and then we can thank Mr. Rutherford if no one else has questions. Director Smith.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Rutherford, I'd like to thank Tom for the great presentation. Lots of good reading material for all of us. I have invited Tom to my home with residents from Area G, Area H, and Ladysmith so that we could look at the model of the Cowichan Watershed Board. It was an opportunity for us to have a discussion on things that have gone forward through the Watershed Board that were pluses and things that were maybe not the best way to start. It was a good conversation because when we're looking at the Cowichan Watershed Board, a lot of people assume that it covers the whole Cowichan Valley. And so it's good to sit down and go over things with Tom to understand where they've gone, how they've gotten there, and that we do have different watersheds and needs in multiple areas. And those are all really good ways to have this discussion between a lot of the electoral areas and other areas. I'm sure that North Cowichan has concerns about the Cowichan or the Chemainus River. So there's other water areas, and I would like to figure out how we can all utilize what the Cowichan Watershed Board has done and the society. You know, you look at 10 years and that's approximately $500,000 that all Cowichan Valley Regional District taxpayers have funded towards this society. And each of the other areas also have needs. So we need to, as we work together with the Cowichan Watershed Board, find out how we can utilize some of their knowledge and expertise in our other areas. So I'd like to thank Tom for his presentation. I guess I didn't really have a question. I just thought it was an opportunity to say, you know, we value all the work you've done. We need to also utilize and change areas in the north, in the south, that can also be putting together some sort of program like this, or at least work towards it. Thank you.
Thank you. That comment raises questions for me, but I'll take those offline. Thank you very much, Tom. I don't see any more questions from the directors. I want to thank you for the work. Obviously, having the opportunity to work with you all over the last 6 months or so has been a very enlightening process. Digging into the history, some of which I knew and most of which I did not, with all of the documentation and work that's been done. It's such a great resource to have such a great history that is so well documented. Although some of it was drier than others, all of that reading that was given to me at the beginning of my term as chair here was really enlightening, and I feel like I learned a lot, and I learn more every day from obviously from the chief and all of our members at the Watershed Board, but especially through you and staff. I really appreciate all of that work and the history that goes behind it. Well, thank you very much. I think we'll give you a virtual clap. Thank you.
I'd just like to acknowledge all the hard work you guys do. You have a difficult job, and we need strong leaders at this time, and I think we have them here in the Valley. So thank you for that, and I wish you the best for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Hitchka. All right. So we'll let Mr. Rutherford go. It looks like he's on his way out. And we'll go back to Ms. Legault through the agenda. I have no report of the chairperson today. I do not believe we have any correspondence. So I think that takes us down to information, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item IN1 is the Shawnigan Residents Association report on the use of CBRD grant and aid funding for Milfoil Education and Communications. And the recommendation is just for information.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions with this presentation at this time? Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just say that, you know, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
the community was really upset about the milfoil. It has been growing extensively every year. So last year I had asked the Residents Association to do a communication out. And as you can tell, they did a great job. They reached hundreds of people, created roundtables, created ambassadors. So an overall very successful campaign. And then I presented to you guys, so I perhaps something on the roundtable, if you remember, the board had approved a roundtable, which Flinro was present, DFO and the MOE, and of course the president of the Basin Society, Dave Monday, was there, and he is the technically the only professional on the board. And it was all agreed that the campaign should run again because it was a successful campaign, and DFO was not happy to hear about the efforts that had been done without permits, and those were not from the SRA. So, and there was discussion about the timing window. There was one person from the public who has mentioned it at the beginning of the meeting, and it was refused. You know, so the DFO and Flinro have their boundaries of when the weed can be pulled. And it does state in the Madrone report that it should be done with the proper permits. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about the actual campaign. I'll do my best to answer them.
I appreciate that. And I know when I listen to the comments and public input, there are challenges with the jurisdictional layers there and timing. I know that our in-stream windows for any kind of work often cause challenges. So I think that everybody, I don't think that's necessarily a negative reflection on the program, but just some of the limitations of working with Flinro and DFO. And I think that, you know, I'm thankful for the work, and hopefully we can continue to push those other levels of government for understanding better the challenges around it. And, you know, especially around your quotes around permitted times and uses and things like that. So I think that's all good for clarification based on that public input.
Yes, and if I could just add, you know, we realize that we recognize people are going to do it anyway. So it's best to give them the best means and the best way to do it, and you know, and what we're permitted to do. So that's, you know, what we communicated out to the community.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And Director Smith.
I can see the challenges for Director Acton. I grew up in the Okanagan. Kalamalka Lake was definitely struggling with the milfoil, and they did put in programs where they brought in machines that churned it up during the winter, but then all the kids would play in the lake and they would be pulling it up, putting it on their paddle boards during the summer and just spreading it. So it seems like no matter what you do, like you said, you're in a bit of a challenge, but I think it's great that Shawnigan Lake is working towards this. It's definitely important.
Thank you. And unless I miss any hands, I think we're good. That item was for information. So we will go on to committee reports. Ms. Legault. I think actually I go to Director Morrison next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We report from our EASC meeting held on May the 20th. The items 1 through 9 are for all directors, and we read these out verbatim at our Electoral Area Services Committee. I'll try and make sure I get the message across as for each item. And they're as follows. We report and recommend as follows that 1, grant and aid electoral area A, Mill Bay, Malahat, in the amount of $100 be provided to the Shawnigan Residents Association to support the Buy Local Business and Organization Directory. 2, that a grant and aid electoral area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $500 be granted to Cowichan Secondary School for 2020 graduation bursary. Item 3, that a grant and aid electoral area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $100 be provided again to the Shawnigan Residents Association for that creation of that same local digital library. 4, grant and aid electoral area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $500 provided to Francis Kelsey Secondary School for 2020 graduation bursary. 5, grant aid electoral area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scots Falls, in the amount of $500 provided to Lake Cowichan School to assist a graduating high school student from electoral area F in the pursuit of additional educational or career training opportunities. 6, CBRD bylaw number 4327, Shawnigan Lake North Water System Service Loan Authorization, $1.62 million water treatment project bylaw 2020 be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings. 7, bylaw number 4324, Missachi Lake Sewer System Service Amendment, Boundary Extension Name Change bylaw 2020, and CBRD bylaw 4325, South Shore Communities Loan Authorization Phase 2, Sewer Collection and Treatment Project bylaw 2020 be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings. 8, that the budget for function 815, Arbutus Ridge Sewer System, be amended to A, increase transfer operational reserve funding by $120,000, and B, increase capital engineering structures by $120,000, and 2, that expenditure of these funds prior to adoption of the budget bylaw amendment be approved. And 9, that the budget for function 325, community planning, be amended by 1, increasing conditional grant revenue by $150,000, and 2, by increasing consultants expense by $150,000. And I move those 9 items.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion on those? Director Smith.
Thank you very much. I just am not sure if the municipal directors are aware of the function 325 is only an electoral area function, and that the community planning is moving these funds that are technically for electoral areas and municipalities into this for just the function, the money going in and the money coming out as an expense. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think most of us are aware of it. Is the regional housing requirement under legislation from the province. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, motion carries. And we'll move on to the second part, Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the next items will be 10, 12, and 13, and they're for electoral area directors only. And item 10, that it be recommended to the board that development variance permit number DVP 19G02 for PID 000767735 be issued. 12, that zoning amendment bylaw for application number RZ19B04 for PID 005997283 be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second readings. And 2, that a public hearing be waived for application number RZ19B04 in accordance with section 464 sub 2 of the Local Government Act, as the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the South Cowichan Official Community Plan Bylaw 3510. And 13, number of items here, that OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for application RZ18A02 be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second readings. 2, that prior to consideration of adoption of OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for that application, a restrictive covenant regarding property restrictions, land conservation, and community amenity contribution provisions be registered on title. 3, that the referrals for OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for that application to the Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Malahat Fire, Malahat Nation, and Stumunas First Nation be accepted. 4, that a public hearing be scheduled for OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for that application with directors from electoral areas A, B, and F as delegates. And 5, that the community amenity contribution for application RZ18A02 earmarked for the Kerry Park Centre Capital Project Reserve Fund be redirected to the electoral area A Community Parkland Acquisition Reserve Fund. And I move those items.
We move by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Salmon, any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? And opposed, motion carries.
That concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Morrison. And we'll move on to, Ms. Legault, was all of CR2 deleted or was it just one item?
The complete item, but there was only one item to come forward.
Thank you. So that moves us down to staff reports. SR1 is a report from the Chief Administration Officer regarding the restoration of district services plan, and there is a recommendation there. Ms. Legault, sorry, I fell into my old council practices. I was stealing the thunder there, but I'll go to Mr. Carruthers, and then we do have a recommendation. Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the restoration of district services plan is before you as a policy document. As you know, the province has issued their Restart BC program, and we are currently in British Columbia in phase 2. Correspondingly, we are looking as local government at how we can begin to start to restore some of those services that were curtailed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the provincial state of emergency over the last 2 months. We have a number of operating plans and procedures designed to allow us to start introducing those services, but at the recommendation of the Municipal Insurance Association of BC, it's recommended that the board pass a guideline policy document that will talk about how and when at a high level we will begin to restore those services. So as you will notice in the plan, they're primarily focused on the administration office on Ingram Street, as well as our parks and our recreation functions. Many of the other functions of the regional district have continued to be offering service, albeit in some modified manner, but those 3 particular areas we've had a significant curtailment of service. So this plan lays out a staged approach to resuming service, with the ultimate stage being either the pandemic being declared over or having a vaccine, at which time we would be in a position of restoring full service back to the public. Of note is that we are planning to resume service at the 175 Ingram office on June 1st in a limited way. We have it open for things like the sale of transit passes, for dog licenses, for courier pickup and drop off. Those sorts of things. We continue to encourage the public, as they have been doing for the last 2 months, to engage with us electronically, either by telephone or by email, where we can make appointments with those members of our public and deal with their issues or their concerns or their needs one-on-one through those means. So this lays out a framework, particularly with respect to parks and to recreation centres. The BC Recreation and Parks Association has been given the mandate provincially to guide the restoration of those services across the province. And a document has been issued recently from the BCRPA to provide guidelines around restoring various services in parks and recreation. And John Elzinga is working with his regional colleagues to look at how that plan can be implemented and rolled out across the region. So you're going to be hearing more in the coming days about the resumption of services in our parks. Recreation centers will still be closed to the public for a period of time, although we are looking at restoring some programs where they can be done outside and in a safe manner for the public. But there will be more details to come. I want to stress that this is, again, a high-level document. It's a policy document, and we will have individual operating plans and guidelines for every one of the services as we restore them. And for example, at 175 Ingram, a number of steps have been taken to install physical barriers, to install signage, to install administrative guidelines for the public that will be entering the building, as well as procedures for our staff to follow in order to keep our staff and the public safe when they're attending our building. So this report is in front of you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I don't have anyone on my speakers list yet. If I've missed someone, this is the opportunity. I want to thank staff. I know how hard, I've got Director Sebring and Smith. I know how hard everybody's been working on this, and especially in collaboration with the province, other regional districts, other provincial entities, the recreation associations. I can see it through the municipal and the regional lens, and frankly, the regional folks have a lot more daunting task, but I do appreciate the work, and I'll go to the questions now from the directors. Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Carruthers. Just for clarification, I know that municipally we're looking at aligning with school districts because schools are back open again June 1st on a sort of an on-call voluntary basis, and their playgrounds are opening up. And I've been told by staff municipally that we're working to align with that in terms of our municipal playground facilities specifically, because a playground is a playground to kids. They don't care if it's, you know, school district, municipal, or regional. Is that one of the short-term goals, is to get those playgrounds open in the regional district on June 1?
Yeah, likewise, through to the chair, to Director Sebring, we are also coordinating with the municipalities. I don't have an exact date for exactly when our playgrounds are open, but that is the target, is that we are looking to get those facilities open. And if I have Mr. Farquhar or Mr. Elzinga can respond to that question. Thank you, Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers and Director Sebring. Through the chair, we did have a regional coordination call yesterday, which included Ladysmith, North Cowichan, the Sportsplex, as well as the Cowichan Valley Regional District. Playgrounds are one of the first amenities to open. What we're looking to do right now is coordinate on signage and cleaning protocols. So we're hearing from the Municipal Insurance Association around cleaning right now, but signage is one of our first responsibilities before we can open them.
Just as a supplementary, if I might, I was on a conference call with the Minister of Municipal Affairs last week, and Chair Stone, I think, was there too. And the province was talking about rolling out some standardized signage province-wide, whether they were going to do it or not. But that was a request from a number of the mayors and regional district chairs from all over the place, because everybody's facing the same thing. So if you haven't done so, I'd suggest you touch base with those folks, because they may have some standardized formatting template stuff that we could use.
Through to Director Sebring, we're sharing some of the workload. So we have Don Stewart in North Cowichan taking the responsibility for signage around skate parks, and he's coordinating with others. Brian Farquhar is taking it for playgrounds. So we're working together on coordinated signage, and we'll certainly investigate that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have, through the chair, I think to Mr. Elzinga, I have, or maybe Mr. Carruthers. So one of my questions is, who's going to be monitoring these regulations that are going to be put in under this plan? Will some of it be under the bylaw department, bylaw enforcement, or how will it be monitored?
Mr. Chair, I can take that question. Under this particular plan, there are no regulations. This plan follows the guidelines of the Provincial Health Authority and the province in terms of various restrictions on social distancing, gatherings, closures of certain businesses. The local government bylaw enforcement officers have been asked across the province to take a role in enforcing and educating the public with respect to those various restrictions, recognizing that our bylaw officials have no authority to ticket or to otherwise impose penalties for people that are found contravening those restrictions. So we work with the health authority when violations are observed. We report them accordingly and leave it to the appropriate authorities to investigate. In terms of, and probably has more relevance to the restoration of services, is we will be guided by WorkSafe BC in terms of how we deliver our services and with respect to our staff. So all of our operations within our buildings and our staff functions are guided by WorkSafe BC and all safe work practices and operating procedures.
Yeah, and just I'll come back to you for a follow-up, and just reflecting again on the conference calls that we've had with the minister. Or anything that is not in order is not actually enforceable. So when it comes to bylaw enforcement on some of the social distancing measures or how people conduct themselves in park, it's an education and prompt sort of asking them to do the right things. If there's an actual order violation, that would be referred to the health authority, health officer for action.
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Elzinga had something further to offer to my response.
Okay, Mr. Elzinga, and then I'll go back to Director Smith. Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Specific to recreation centers and the services that we're providing, we're understanding from the British Columbia Recreation and Parks Association guideline that we will be accepting exposure control plans from each of our user groups. So to Director Smith's question, we will be working to get those exposure control plans. We'll be looking at potential waiver modifications, as well as a different language in our user agreements around COVID-19.
Thank you. Follow-up, Director Smith.
Yes, so I see in the June through September, the reopening of the CBRD recreation centers, inclusive of the societies. And will the societies be responsible for their own for the regulations that are under BC, under the health and under WorkSafe BC? The responsibilities will be on those societies?
Yeah, through the chair, yes. I mean, essentially, we lease those facilities to those societies. They're responsible for operating their facilities under the same guidelines that we are. Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. And I just want to again clarify the difference between regulation, which these are not, they're recommendations and guidelines, but they're not enforceable. So we do have some responsibility there. And just to be clear that if they're not in order, they're not enforceable items. So I do have a bit of a speaker list here. Director Morrison and Haim, and did I miss anyone else? All right, thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this might be through to staff. One of the things that I observed when we first went into the our emergency stance was that there was the appearance, and this was to a lot of the people in my community, that we had consistent messaging, and that was from our provincial health officer and the likes, and we had a fairly compliant citizenry, and everybody pitched in and did the right thing. And I think we've been fortunate with the results as far as the response to COVID-19. But one of the things that did emerge was there seemed to be a fair bit of confusion developed because there wasn't a sort of across the board consistency across our municipalities and the regional districts as to how we approached most things. And I totally acknowledge your warning about the fact that these aren't regulations, they're guidelines and the likes, and they're not enforceable. But I think that everything that we can do towards reducing any possible confusion amongst our community members is going to be important, because there's a lot of pent up desire for people to get out and about beyond the edge of their properties and their gardens, and to go and do a lot of the things that services that we provide. But it's about that consistency of messaging. I'd like it if there's going to be a tennis court policy in North Cowichan, that it'll be reflected in Area F or Area A or the town of Ladysmith. Are we expecting we're going to have some consistency in how we roll this out, and voluntary compliance from all the partners as we move forward? Because we want to be safe in this.
All right, before I go to you, Mr. Carruthers, I just want to give an example of why that's not always achievable, and that's when we closed the parking lots at Transfer Beach and Holland Creek trailheads. And it was because we could no longer ensure social distancing because those facilities were overloaded during the Easter long weekend. And so we had to make the decision to, on our own, close those facilities to limit the amount of people that were coming to them. And it was successful, but then we lifted those restrictions before the long weekend, and we seem to be okay. But Mr. Carruthers, I know that's been the goal, but sometimes we have to respond to the realities in individual areas. Maybe you can speak to
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to say essentially the same thing. Our goal is to have consistency, and I'm meeting and talking regularly with the CAOs from the municipalities within the regional district. I'm also actually meeting regularly with the CAOs from the RDN and Comox Valley Regional District. As you heard from Mr. Elzinga, John and Mr. Farquhar are regularly engaged with their counterparts in the municipalities to formulate a regional approach to restoring services. So as much as possible, we are attempting to be consistent, but we always recognize that there's going to be variations and specific needs in municipalities, but that is our objective, yes.
Thanks. And I would say the good example, though, was the tennis courts, because I think as we close things down, some things got closed that maybe we didn't consider in those conversations, right? And the tennis courts was one example of some disconnections, and that was more about the shutdown than necessarily the reopening. So hopefully we can be as coordinated as possible on the restart plan. And Director Morrison, if you're good, I'll go to Director Hink.
Thank you. Just a question with regards to the possibility of a second wave or the best laid plans not working out. Is there a need for policy or communication with regards to, one of a better way to say it, kind of a what if, recognizing that these plans go through to the fall or even beyond? What provision would there be for the communication of altered plans or even the possibility of altered plans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and very good question. I've stressed in the plan that this is a fluid plan and that it's responsive to the direction from the province and our health authorities, and we fully appreciate that there may be a point in time when we get direction to resume some curtailment of certain functions or increase social distancing, physical distancing. We're fortunate now to have had the experience of being through this already, and I think if it is to come upon us again, we'll be in a very good position to be able to ramp down our services if we are required to. But again, this is a flexible plan and it is designed to be adaptive. The plan assumes that we continue on the track that we're continuing on and that we continue to have progress in flattening the curve to an eventual end of the pandemic or a vaccine.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Director Hand? Okay, thank you. Director Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Carruthers. I noted with great interest that you acknowledged the City of Richmond for their excellent work and you've built upon the City of Richmond model. There's also a BC restart plan, but I was just sort of led by that to wonder, I mean, Richmond's obviously a little bit different than the Cowichan Valley Regional District, and there's a lot of different experiences throughout BC. So are you able to just, I guess, briefly describe how different various regions and municipalities are in terms of their restart plans?
Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this really came about last week. The Municipal Insurance Association of BC held a webinar with Dodd Lidstone as the presenter regarding the legal implications of restoring services in local government. And although all of the local governments had ideas and plans for how they were going to restore services, we became acutely aware that we needed to have policy documents to guide that work. Richmond was an early adopter, and they were early out of the gate. Mr. Elzinga actually had passed along that plan to us as a potential template to look at. There weren't a lot of other plans available. And so we very quickly looked to adapt the Richmond plan, and many of the elements are consistent, although there are some regional district nuances obviously in that plan. I can tell you that I shared our plan with all the other 27 regional districts. I think we were probably fairly early out of the gate in terms of developing a formal plan, and many of those regional districts, I believe, are using ours as a template potentially to be moving forward. Civic Info BC has also established a clearinghouse for these types of plans so that local governments can share them. But this is very new. This has simply just come out in the last week. So all of us are kind of scrambling. Those that come after us will have the benefit of all of the work that's been done by many of the municipalities thus far.
Thank you. And it's more about the list of the bases that need to be covered in a plan. The actual content of the plan was fully customized based on our staff and the regional district we live in. Thank you. I believe I have Director Smith.
Through Chair Stone to possibly the Finance Department. On page 10 under financial impact, it's indicating that these costs will be monitored and report to the board on any potential deficits and necessary measures to mitigate financial impacts. We are talking about taxpayers' dollars, and are we not having some sort of forecasts of these costs so that we can have a look at whether whether we should actually be doing some of the plans that are in this restoration plan? Should we be holding off doing some of these based on the financial impact? There is a heavy cost that we've already borne for some of it already when we were shutting down. And so now to start back up, would it be better to hold off and look at those costs later and not putting these costs into the picture at this point? Is there...
Yeah, so ironically, I believe SR2 and SR3 and Ms. Weiner are going to address those very items in the next two items in our agenda, but I'll put this through to Ms. Weiner, and maybe we can save the more detailed information for the board for those two items as was discussed previously. Go ahead, Ms. Weiner.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Smith. Staff are regularly, every month, we're monitoring all of the different budgets and where they're at. And when we see that there's a potential for the deficit, we're going back to the managers that are responsible for those budgets. And those managers will be bringing back reports to the boards.
You also indicated that you're going to give a bit of an update to the board under SR2 and SR3, I believe, just kind of where we're at.
Yes, I will be.
Thank you. Follow up, Director Smith.
Thank you very much. So I have concerns about this financial, that it would end up going to the staff. Staff would then come to the board. Yet here we're sitting here looking at this plan at this particular time, and we may not want to put our taxpayers into this position at this time. There is no forecast of costs and revenue, and it is a decision that we are making at this particular time to adopt this plan as a policy to move forward. I do have concerns about the finances for the taxpayers and possible deficits.
Mr. Chair, if I can respond, the intent of this particular plan is to restore services, and specifically the 175 Ingram office, the parks, and our recreation functions in terms of services and programs to the public. This plan isn't intended to deal with all of the aspects of our operations in terms of our capital projects and our ongoing operations. And those will be subject to discussions by the board. As our Chief Financial Officer has said, we are continuing to monitor our budgets on a regular basis. You have a capital projects report today in front of you to get a sense of where we're at with our capital projects. Where we do see potential financial challenges, we will be advising the board. Further to that, if the board chose to give staff direction with respect to curtailment of expenses, for the balance of the year, that's certainly the board's prerogative. I can tell you that I have told our staff that given the current crisis, that we need to be actively looking at all of our expenditures, and where there are expenditures that we can avoid or put off for a period of time, we're doing that. But again, it is the board's prerogative to give more specific direction with regard to our expenses. In the meantime, we'll continue to be frugal and aware of the taxpayers' challenges and managing our finances very frugally during this period.
Thank you. I'll go then to Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd be willing to move the recommended resolution and would speak to it if there was a seconder.
seconded by Director Hain, and the recommended resolution, because I didn't give that over to Ms. Legault, is that the COVID-19 Regional District Services Restoration Plan be approved. And back to Director Morrison to speak on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be brief. I hear what Director Smith has said, and I think that given the onset of the crisis, I think that there was maybe a little bit of an information gap that some of the electoral area directors might have felt in that we launched the emergency response and everybody went and stayed in their homes and did what work we could from home. Municipal mayors were in conference calls and the like, and that there might have been a little bit of a void or a gap in the information that electoral area directors may have had. And it's just the way it was. But what I'm going to suggest is that that it says right in the document that this is a living document and that there will have to be adjustments made, and we have to trust our staff to give best effort, save money where they can. But what I would like to encourage, that given this is sort of a living document and a plan that may need to be adjusted, can we have just a summary report at each of our board meetings, at least for the first maybe 4 to 6 weeks, as to how the implementation is going, what surprises staff might have run into, and that sort of thing, just so that all of us are current and understand what the sort of state of the rollout of the restart will be. I don't think we have to add it to a motion, but I think that just as a verbal report from the CAO or finance staff, that would be really helpful for at least the electoral area directors to have an understanding of where we're at in the process.
Yeah, I believe that, Mr. Carruthers, you can speak to that, but I believe you've been endeavoring to do that since the beginning of this at every board meeting, was to update where we were in the sort of shutdown and now in the recovery, and I would expect that would be continued to be done.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd be happy to do that. The recovery phase is going to be different than the ramp down phase, in that was fairly immediate and across the board. As we start to recover and restore services, it's going to be gradual, and I think it's important that we keep the board informed of those stages and any challenges that we may be experiencing along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else on my speakers list. We do have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Oh, Director Nicholson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm interested in thinking about how prepared we are, or what we need to do to get prepared for potential infrastructure type spending that might come along as a result of trying to get the economy going again. And I'm wondering if we need to do a little bit of thinking on whether we're organized to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, I'll put that through to Mr. Carruthers. That might be a good item for maybe a regional services or different committee meetings, but on those shovel worthy, as Mr. Hatami had given to me, that I've given to the Rural Economic Development Roundtable as a terminology, or whether they're shovel ready.
Yeah, and that's something that all of our staff are looking at, and we've been pushing hard to ensure that the funding is made available for planning and design as well as for actual implementation, because often we get caught in a trap where we don't have our project shovel ready. So we'll be pushing for that, and staff will certainly be looking at where there's opportunities for us to take advantage of the infrastructure funding. Also have to practically keep in mind capacity to be able to deliver on those projects as well. So with increased spending and taking on numerous projects and project management, we're going to have to also be cognizant of our capacity to manage those as well. So that'll be part of the equation. But I can assure you that staff are looking at that on all fronts in terms of how we can most benefit from funding that's very likely going to be coming available in the weeks and months to come.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing no further hands, I will call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. And over again to Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item SR2 is a staff report from the Finance Division regarding Q1 2020 Capital Project Progress Report, and that is for information.
Thank you. And I believe Ms. Weiner wanted to give us a bit of an update or an introduction just to this information item. Ms. Weiner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the first capital progress report for the first quarter ending March 31st. We'll be bringing these forward to the board quarterly, and it's to outline the 81 projects that were approved in the 2020 budget, which made up 24% of the $100 million budget. Most of these projects were funded from grant funding, borrowing, requisition, and transfers from other reserves, and some of the larger projects are spanning over a couple of years. So of all the 81 projects, the blue projects, which there are 10, have all been completed. The green are on track, and that's 41 projects. The yellow with possible delays, and those delays are due to staff time, availability materials. You'll see in a couple places there's electrical work that may cause delays, as well as going through alternate approval processes. There's only one project right now that's not going to be completed, and that's due to staff wanting to look at putting money into a reserve fund and using the reserve funds in the future versus borrowing. And that project is the Dogwood Ridge water system for $20,000. It's a well rehabilitation project. The dollar figures in this is just the budgeted figures. And if there's any questions, I'm open to hearing them.
Thank you. I've got Director Wilson, and I'll create a speakers list if necessary. It's an information item. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very useful document. Thank you very much for this. On function 411, and this is probably for Mr. Elzinga, will probably know the answer to this one. Kerry Park, 74,500 for signage replacement. Could you tell me what signs are going to cost 74 grand?
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This would be the road signage. It's replaced as part of the parking lot project in both cases. The signage has been approved for quite some time, but we determined to do the paving projects first before the signs were replaced. So these are the large road signs for both Kerry Park and Shawty Lake. The 411 is Kerry Park specific.
Follow up, please.
Yeah, follow up, go ahead.
And I've got to ask the question, it's an awful lot of money for outside signage. Did this go out to tender, and were there competitive bids received on this particular one?
Mr. Elzinga.
So my understanding, and I look for Ms. Weiner's assistance, is that's a budgeted figure based on some of the quotes received in the past. It has not gone out for tender or at this point. Again, we're waiting for the paving project to be completed.
But it would be tendered before it was actually acted on as a capital project.
Correct.
Yes.
If I can interject, it's digital signage, double-sided.
Thank you. And again, there's a competitive bid process, and that will take place, and then we'll see where the budget comes out. Did you have any further follow-ups, Director Wilson?
Yeah, I've got a thing about digital signage. I don't like it at all. I think it's an infringement on everybody, especially when it's dark. I'd rather not see it.
Well, having some experience with it, the new ones are infinitely dimmable and can be very nicely adjusted for nighttime. Because I had one that was like the sunshine outside of my house over the trees, so I know what you're talking about. Sorry, I had Director McGonigal next, and I may have missed other hands in the melee there, but Director McGonigal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, if I may, on some of the ones that may be delayed or not completed, was there grant funding afforded to any of these projects that may be in jeopardy of missing timelines?
At this time, no, we don't have any that are in that category. I'd be bringing that forward as a concern at that point.
Thank you very much.
That is a good point, because some of the capital projects that were underway have been delayed because of COVID. So they have very similar social distancing requirements and stuff, which can impede capital project timelines for sure.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, a follow-up would be perhaps communication with the grant provider on those implications of COVID and the delays caused not on the part of the regional district per se, and perhaps an extension to those deadlines.
Yeah, I believe staff search extensions where they may be necessary, but I'm sure they can take that as advice. Thank you. I think did I see Director Smith? Did you have a question, or did I? Now I'm just getting all jumpy. Okay, all right. I don't see any other hands on my list. Then that was an information item. We'll move on to SR3, which is again Finance Division operating expense progress report for Q1. And Ms. Weiner, you wanted to speak to that as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the other quarterly reporting that Finance is going to start bringing back to the board every quarter. And first of all, I want to point out that this is not a projection. This is merely just a snapshot at this point in time, and that was as of March 31st. And as the pandemic did not occur until, well, it's not declared till March 17th, there is not a huge impact on this first reporting. I just wanted to introduce it, bring it to the board's attention. As well, I wanted to point out that the requisition figures are not in this report, so you may be seeing several deficits showing up, and that is because normally we do not recognize the requisition until the funds are received in August. But I'm going to be bringing that forward in Q2, so the next quarter when you see the reporting, the requisition revenue will be in there, even though we haven't received the funds, so you can have a better reflection of what the budget's really at that point in time. The other thing that has not been included at this point is the allocations, the internal allocations. There's a bit of a variance. If you look at the reporting, you'll see in 2019 that the allocation figures were in there and they aren't at this point, and staff will be bringing forward those allocation numbers forward, and they'll be in for the Q2 reporting. I also wanted to point out that the functions that we selected are the ones that are not dependent on requisition and utility fees. So we looked at them and we came up with transit, building inspection, community planning, bylaw enforcement, the recreation centers, and solid waste management as the functions. For transit, once again, as the pandemic was not declared until the 17th and the free ridership didn't happen until March 19th, refunds and those type of things are not included in this quarter. As well, we just actually last week I signed off on the quarterly reporting for transit, so those figures are just coming in. Land use, community planning, you'll see that there's another revenue line, and I just wanted to point out that was just a deficit that was a carry forward from the previous year, and the funds are coming from operating reserves, and I'll have staff bring that one forward. With building inspection, there's things that for operating and maintenance that come in, and one thing I do want to point out, sometimes there's higher spends at one point of the year and not. So like water and sewer tends to have higher expenditures in the summer. Building inspection, in this case, the vehicle insurance has come through and will be hitting, so that's why the numbers are different this year. Bylaw enforcement, there's also a significant change in the variance for wages, and I wanted to point out that was due to a supplemental request that was approved by the board, and that was a position that was half paid for by parks and half paid for bylaw enforcement, and they moved all of the funds into bylaw enforcement for the 2020 budget. So it looks like there's a significant increase in wages, but that was approved supplemental by the board for the 2020 budget. There's also increased revenue for bylaw enforcement, and that's due to the soil deposits bylaw that was passed. So there's more revenue than has been there in previous years. The other thing I wanted to point out is solid waste is looking like it's right on track for the first quarter.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Weiner. And I just to reflect on Director Smith's earlier comment, obviously this is a quarterly update, but if there is something flagged by finance and operations in general as like a pressing financial issue, can we trust that those would be brought to the board more immediately than 3 months from now? Just because I think, as you say, this is the big critical quarter around COVID shutdown, et cetera. And just having that peace of mind that if something concerning did show up, that it would be brought to the board sooner rather than to look at it in a quarterly fashion.
As I mentioned earlier, finance staff are reviewing these monthly and then discussions with the managers for the various budgets. I also wanted to point out things like transit and things like that. Unfortunately, I just received the March billings. So while I would like to have timely information, it's as timely as I can have it by the invoices coming in.
Thank you. And I believe I have Director Morrison first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and perhaps a question or explanation from our finance staff. And thank you for the report. And if I'm understanding what you're presenting before us is the template that we'll be following for the future. We don't have any of our requisition income in here, and this sort of sets the table for our future reports, if I'm not mistaken. But the one question that I had, which I thought was a bit of an outlier here, was function 515. You've got the curbside garbage and recycling, and I thought that was a bit of an odd one because it isn't requisition dependent, and we send a utility bill for it, and I don't anticipate there being a lot of variance one way or the other, either on the revenue or the expense side. I don't anticipate there being a huge number of residents defaulting on paying their garbage fees. So I'm wondering why that one's in there. I think I don't need a whole bunch of information around that. I think it should be fairly static, unless I'm missing something. If staff could explain why that would be included in there in the list.
Through the chair to Director Morrison, one of the reasons we brought this one forward was because we are sending out for curbside. We don't always necessarily have the revenue come in. There's a cash flow part of it, but easily we can take that one out.
Thank you. I don't have any other hands. This is an information item again. Oh, now I do. Director Smith.
Thank you very much. I'd like to see the curbside garbage recycle remain in there as a user fee. People may not be paying that bill, and it would be important for us to have a look at that as we move along. Thank you.
Thank you. As it's in the report, and Ms. Weiner, maybe you can just clarify, we did extend those utility payment not the due dates, but we waived the penalties. So maybe that was a reason for keeping an eye on it, because as we waived some of those penalties or extended the deadlines, maybe people would be less apt to pay on time. Was there a logic behind that might help us?
In response to that question, the curbside bills actually quite often there's a significant amount of them that roll over and go into taxes outstanding. So there is no discount or no incentive for people to pay those ones on a timely basis, like the penalty or like the water and sewer. Because water and sewer, there's a discount that occurs and people are more encouraged to pay because they want to take advantage of the discount. Where curbside, there is no discount. And so people don't necessarily pay that one, and a fair amount of them roll over into taxes and arrears.
Thank you very much. It's unclear because out in Area H, we still don't have curbside, unfortunately. That's just a shot to the director of the area. Maybe that's something we could look at again in the future. Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions for Ms. Weiner before we move on? None. So thank you very much. Appreciate all the detail and more information to come. Just to the board, I know we are on to bylaws now, and I do notice, though, it's been almost an hour and 45 minutes. Did we need a break, or can we go through the bylaws? And we do have one new business item as well. So if there's a, do I have just a straw poll, and if anyone needs a break?
I'm quite prepared to carry on.
Well, I got one nod and one prepared to carry on. That didn't give me any clarity. Maybe a hand. Do you need a break? If you do, raise your hand. Okay, well, it's 50-50. I don't want to punish people. Why don't we just take 5 minutes? And that'll give an opportunity for those for question period to send their questions into legislative services at cvrd.bc.ca. And we will take just a 5-minute recess. If we can all be back at 3:20, we will resume the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On to bylaws. Item B1, CVRD bylaw 4324, Missachi Lake Sewer System Service Amendment, Boundary Extension and Name Change bylaw 2020 for first, second, and third readings.
Thank you. Moved by Director Morrison. Seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. B2 is CVRD bylaw 4325, South Shore Community Sewer System Service Loan Authorization, Phase 2 Sewage Collection and Treatment Project, $1,323,000, bylaw 2020 for first, second, and third reading.
Thank you. I believe that was moved by Director Morrison and seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? And opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Item B3 is CVRD bylaw 4327, Shawnigan Lake North Water System Service Loan Authorization, Water Treatment Project, $1,620,000, bylaw 2020 for first, second, and third reading.
Thank you. Moved by? Do we have a mover? Director Staples, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? And opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Mr. Chair, this is a bylaw for electoral area directors only, CVRD bylaw 4326, South Cowichan Zoning Amendment bylaw 2020 for first reading.
Thank you. Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, this is for electoral area directors only. All those in favor? And opposed? And opposed, motion carries. And back to Ms. Legault, new business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item NB1 is a staff report from the Development Services Division on temporary expanded liquor service areas authorization. And the recommendation for consideration is that pre-approval of temporary expanded service area applications received prior to October 31st, 2020, in accordance with Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch Policy Directive number 20-313 and the order of the Provincial Health Officer regarding food service establishments and liquor services dated May 22nd, 2020 be authorized.
I believe that's moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. I believe this will be the summer of patio dining by the looks of all these patio expansions. Sorry, Director Smith, did you have a question?
While we're talking about patio dining, this may not be the correct position to or spot to ask this question, but what will we be doing for businesses that'll be moving into their parking lots or parking areas and their parking requirements for their business? Is this something that we need to bring up with land use and bylaw enforcement? And I just want to, I know it may not be the right spot to ask it, but if we're looking at liquor out in the patio and then this, we are going to start running into this issue also.
Yeah, I would suggest you're probably right. It would likely be a land use EAS discussion, but I would put that through to staff for comment. Hello, Ms. Kroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Wilson and Smith, excuse me. Yes, so this matter would most suitably be discussed at Electoral Area Services. I believe that we do enforce by complaint, right? If there's a bylaw violation. If you want to consider taking proactive measures, you could look at your enforcement policies. So there could be further discussion about that. This issue that you've just considered is specific to liquor license establishments.
And I know just, I know it's different at a municipal lens, but we're going through this kind of, how do we manage these changes over the short term and, how that plays into longer term considerations as well. So I believe that if you work with Chair Morrison from EAS, maybe this can be brought forward as a discussion for the EAS directors at the next meeting or soon. Obviously, it's timely as well, right? Thank you. All right, so I believe that moves us through the question period, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just refreshing my screen here, but I have not received any submissions for question period.
All right, so we'll then entertain, I believe, a motion to go into closed session Just procedurally, we will have to leave this meeting. You should have received a closed session invitation. So as quickly as we can turn it around and get back into that meeting, we can all move on with our days. So I saw multiple movers. I think I had Director Kuhn and Director Justice to resolve in the closed session, and that's under section 90.1. I think it was, Director Morrison can remind me.
1 sub I.
Sub I, thank you.
I believe.
Legal advice. Thank you very much. That's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. We will see you in, oh, sorry, Director Seabrook.
Just a technical point. I got the WebEx meeting invite, but I'm not sure we can join the meeting until 4 o'clock because it's calendared for 4.
Oh, mine shows 3:45. Sorry, is that, can we not join the meeting?
Yeah, maybe it is 3:45, but can we join it before 3:45? That's just a technical thing. I'm wondering. Oh, I'm happy to try.
When I received the invitation, I right away asked why it was set late and for so long. But Ms. Legault, can we join quickly, or do we have to wait?
As soon as we end this meeting, I will start the next meeting, and people will be able to join as soon as I start.
Okay, thank you.
Director Morrison, did you have a question? No. Okay, great. Thank you all.